You could see him arrive. He stood 6'6" and weighed 245, kind of broad.
I remember when I first got on the air 13, 14 years ago, people sending me documents and books and materials about Patton being murdered. And now they've got government documents. They've got proof. If you Google General Patton murdered by CIA, you get the Sunday Express, you get the London Telegraph, you get mainstream news. And the guy that really ferreted out all these latest documents to prove this and why they did it joins us now, Robert Wilcox, author of Target Patton, The Plot to Assassinate General George Patton. Since he was on earlier in the year, I think it was January, it's now gotten a lot of attention. And people say, well, this happened 60 years ago. Why does it matter? It shows you who runs our government, who runs our country. And for police and military out there to know that all of you are expendable too. And the people running our nation wrap themselves in the flag. Patton didn't want to give Germany to the Soviets. He didn't like putting millions of Germans in camps or, more importantly, U.S. troops. This is on record. That were grabbed out of Germans' prisoner of war camps, and tens of thousands, and the U.S. military just said, keep them. Yeah, Joe, they're a present to you. That's what they think of you. So this is on record. And so to recap what happened to Patton, the documents, what's coming out, what the family's saying, and where this is going, is the author of Target Patton, Robert Wilcox. Robert, good to have you on with us today.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me back.
You bet. It's a quick segment now, long segment coming up. But, I mean, tell folks in a nutshell about the book and the aftermath of these documents and materials coming out now.
Well, Patton, I think I could go before a grand jury and get an indictment. But, talk motive first. He wanted to fight the Russians. He was livid, like you said, about all of the POWs that were left there. He just didn't think it was right that we should liberate from the Nazis and then give it to the Russians. And he also knew secrets that would have taken down some of the great potentates of our lives. Eisenhower, for instance, a great diplomat, but a terrible war fighter. The war could have been over maybe in September of 44. Think of the lives that would have been saved if they'd have let Patton go. But they didn't.
The globalists wanted the Cold War. Continue.
They didn't want him to go on, and he was a guy like you never see today. A guy who believed things and said them and stood on principle. And he wanted to go and fight the Russians, and they weren't going to let it happen because at that time the American government was big buddies with the Russians, and it's even worse.
Uncle
than that.
Joe Stalin, who'd killed 60 million of his own people. Uncle Joe.
Uncle Joe, that's what FDR used to call him. And, FDR was convinced that Stalin was a great man, that Russia was a great country, and that they were needed to keep the world a better place after the war. And so that in a nutshell, those two are the biggest reasons. He wanted to fight the Russians, and he was going to tell secrets about people that would have stopped them cold from
Wasn't the last straw from reading your book, but previously also looking into it, that he said, I'm going to talk about how our POWs are in the Russian hands? And they said, that's it. Kill him.
Well, I can't say that, Alex. I can't say. All I can tell you is that while Bill Donovan, and what the book does is I found eyewitnesses. The man who says that he staged the accident, that eventually ended in Patton's death. Douglas Posada was an assassin for the OSS, and he had a meeting with Wild Bill Donovan, who was the head of the OSS. And Wild Bill Donovan didn't report to anyone except for the president and possibly the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And there were a series of meetings, and this thing started off with a stop Patton, which is a matter of record. They stole his gas, preventing him from going into Germany and ending the war earlier. But after the war, when they'd used him to win the war, then they had a meeting with Patton. Actually, only one man, Donovan did. And I've gotten Posada's diaries, as well as interviewing him before he died. And basically at that meeting they said, look, we have this great general, he's done great things for us, but now he's threatening to ruin everything, and you've got to stop him, Douglas. And Douglas said, what do you mean, sir? And he said, well, you do what you have to do. And Douglas said, you mean kill him? Yes, you do what you have to do. And this is after about 8 meetings that progressed from stop Patton, which they did by taking his gas and not allowing him to end the war when he really could have done so, and the Germans will tell you so. This was at the point where he roared through France, and he put the Germans in disarray. And at that point, they'll tell you, they could have been defeated. All of their armies were streaming back into Germany, and he knew it, and he could have killed them. He could have stopped them. But,
yeah, he had their main force cut off on the Western Front. He'd done a flank on them. But God forbid that. You got to give it to the Soviets. They've got to set up East Germany.
Absolutely.
You know, the social control freaks, the bureaucrats that have to have control, so they give it to their bureaucratic buddy, Uncle Joe. Stay there.
Do you understand how dark it is? How far down the line we are? How late it is?
All right, going back to Robert Wilcox, author of Target Patton. Before we continue with the assassination, what it's been like now that your book's out, the diaries confirmed, the eyewitnesses, the documents, all of this. If you had any repercussions, have you talked to Patton's family, his heirs, his ancestors?
No. They've been strangely silent. I tried early on in the beginning of writing this book to get in touch with them because I think they have either information or archives that really could help a person like myself who knows a lot more than anyone else about it simply because I've been working on it for 10 years. But there's been no real discussion from them. There was something posted on Amazon that someone said, "Why do you bring this up?" And it's the Kennedy syndrome. You know, they don't want to hear about it. I think they think it besmirches their hero's reputation. But this has to be put out in the open because he was a great patriot, and what happened to him was terrible. And we need to get the finalization on it. There's still stuff to come out. I have heard from people. I always thought that I would open up a can of worms and they just come roaring in, but I think we're too far away from it. But I've heard from various people. For instance, the scene of the accident in which Patton was hurt at and subsequently died from. All types of mysterious people were over it, and one of them is identified. All of them are identified in my book, who we could identify. But one in particular, a very mysterious figure. Well, someone called me and said, "I knew that man, and I once talked to him about." Somehow the Patton death came out, and he turned blue and ran away, and not ran away, but walked away, and we never heard from him again. He was a friend in this circle of friends. And that showed to me that, well, he must have had some guilt about the thing. So anyway, the reaction has just been continual, a lot of praise for the book. Believe me, I spent 10 years at it. I'm a professional writer. I just look for stories. I don't go after things just to go after things. I look for good stories. This one was brought to me by my cousin, who was an international private eye investigator, has a firm of his own, who told me that he knew of Bazada, this person who eventually confessed to me that he had actually set up the accident, the strange accident. And when I went to Bazada, let me say that he never would have talked to me had he not had a stroke. This man lived his entire life as what he called a clandestine. This is the very secret persons. And during the war, he was an assassin. One of the first things I did after he told me his story, he had been at Jedburgh, which was really courageous. This was the beginning of our special forces. He had jumped behind enemy lines, behind the German lines. His job was to organize the Maquis against the Germans when they were fighting back at D-Day. He did all that. Tremendous story about him. And I went to the National Archives, and I dug up everything he told me, and it was all true. This man was sterling as far as what he had told me. And then, as it went on, and we continued to interview, he then told me about. At first, the story was that he knew about this, and that's what my cousin had told me. But it developed finally, and it was obvious as we talked more about it, that he had actually been the guy he was talking about, that he knew about. And so Douglas Bazada, this OSS assassin, and the OSS is the forerunner of the CIA, got the order from Wild Bill Donovan to do this. And the other part of that, the other strong part of that, was that there was an intelligence officer with the CIC, that was sort of the FBI of the Army, with Patton's forces. And after the war, he found out about the plot from the Russian side. And let me state right now that this was an OSS NKVD operation. Stalin ordered the hit of Patton as well. And by the way, the OSS and the NKVD were in collusion. And this is all in Target Patton, something that very few people know about.
Well, by the way, sir, separately talking to other historians and folks, I mean, deep with the Russians, even after the Cold War starts, giving them the nukes, giving them the factories, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Opel factories. I mean, the same crap, U.S.-made goods going through Russia to North Vietnam during that war. This was two military-industrial complexes propping each other up.